Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bible class. We are studying the Sermon on the Mount, and we're in Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 and 28. You have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. All right, so a little bit of definition. The term adultery is the sexual act between two people, and one of them is married. So it's not the same as fornication, which is a much broader word. All adultery is fornication, but not all fornication is adultery. That's the best way to think of it. Adultery has to have two people who are married. So if there's two unmarried people committing sin in that manner, then that's not fornication. But if one of the people, or if both of the people are married, and obviously not married to each other, then that is adultery. So you've heard that it was said by them of old time. Jesus is going back. He's into this statement here. You have heard, but I say unto you. And this is not so much a wrong thing that he's correcting. This is you have heard this, but I'm adding more to it. So you've heard that it's been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. And that, of course, is one of the 10 commandments. I believe that's Exodus chapter 20, verse 14, where it says that, Thou shalt not commit adultery. That's not the only place in the Old Testament that says that. There's actually there are several pretty lengthy passages in the book of Proverbs which prohibit such a thing. Proverbs chapter 6, we'll get to that in just a second. But this is a prohibition. And the reason for that is God designed man and woman to be exclusive in this relationship, in the intimate relationship. He designed that relationship to be for marriage and not for anything else. If you go to Matthew chapter 19, it talks about, Matthew 19, verse 3, the Pharisees came to him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered and said unto them, Have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh? Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man put asunder. This is the only relationship, the marriage relationship, where this act is allowed, sanctified, honorable. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4, I'm going to read it in the English Standard Version. It says, Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. For God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. So where is that act, that intimate act, allowed? Well, it is allowed by God. It is permitted by God only in the marriage relationship. Other than that, says God will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterous. So adultery is considered one of those sins that God will judge. So you have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. Matthew 5:27. And that is something that continues. That's something that the New Testament has restated. It's one of the 10 commandments that has been restated. The only one that hasn't been restated is the command to remember the Sabbath day, not work on the Sabbath day. James, for example, in James chapter 2 says, verse 10 says, "For whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. For he that said, do not commit adultery, said also, do not kill. Now if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law. So speak ye and so do, as they that shall be judged by the law of liberty." So he mentions those two commandments there in James 2, don't commit adultery and don't kill. And he says, if you obey one of them and break the other one, well, you're still guilty of the whole law. Obviously, if you aren't a murderer, yet you commit adultery, well, you're guilty just the same as in the example that James uses, where you don't commit adultery, but you commit a murder. So don't do either of those. Don't break God's law, and this is one of the laws that has been restated. So you've heard that it has been said, but I say unto you. This but I say unto you in verse 28 of Matthew chapter 5 is not changing this law, and it's not diminishing from the importance of what we have in Matthew chapter 5, in verse 27 there, thou shalt not commit adultery. That is a given. And we are prohibited from that based on scriptures from the New Testament, not just scriptures in the Old Testament, but from the New Testament. But Jesus wants to add to this because, well, there's more of a problem than just committing the act. And he says, but I say unto you that whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. So this is a way that Jesus has explained that the sin expands, I guess. This is an expansion of that sin, looking upon a woman to lust after her. And it makes sense that Jesus mentions looking upon a woman. That's not to say that a woman can't look on a man to lust after him, but men are just generally more visual creatures than women, is, I guess, I've been told that. But men are more visual. But still, I would say that this would apply to either gender. If you're looking at somebody else to lust after them, well, there's something wrong. Now, this does not mean that if you accidentally see something that you shouldn't, well, that you've already committed this adultery and that you've already committed this sin. And this is the world that we live in has a lot of opportunity to lust. I'm not talking about what you can find on the internet, the pornography that you can find on the internet, which is specifically designed to get people to lust. But also, even if you walk into a supermarket, something like Kroger or Walmart, and you look at the magazines, you're going to see people not dressed as modestly as they need to be, and they're dressed in such a way that's designed to get people to lust. You've heard of the saying, sex sells. Well, you get somebody lusting, you get somebody thinking about that, and it makes them want to buy the product. So you can be advertising something that has nothing to do with sexuality, but if you put somebody who's scantily clad, whether it's a woman or a man, depending on who you're going to sell to, your advertisement is going to be effective. So people have figured that out, and as a result of that, we see that kind of thing in all over the place, on billboards, once again, on the internet, not on specific sites designed for lust, but just on, you can go anywhere and see the little pop-up ads, and sometimes they have things that are inappropriate. So I don't think it's really possible to avoid seeing something that's inappropriate. But what happens when you do? And this is the important thing. In verse 28, it says, whosoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. So there's intent there. If one looks and sees something that is inappropriate, there's the temptation. Remember, temptation is not sin. You are not a sinner just because you have been tempted to sin. What the devil wants you to do when he shows you those pictures, or if you're walking down the street and you see somebody who is not wearing, or who's wearing revealing clothing or something like that, that's Satan tempting you. He's putting the temptation before you, and he's hoping that you will act on that temptation. So what is acting on that temptation? Well, you can see and you can recognize this is a temptation for me. But when you look, it says, when you look on the woman to lust after her, then you've committed that adultery already in your heart. So there's intent there. It's like you see something and you continue to look at it instead of seeing something and, oh, I don't need to look at that. Avert your eyes, close your eyes, whatever you need to do to avoid following up on that temptation. And that's how other temptations work, right? You are presented with a temptation to act on, and Satan wants you to go for it. I guess this temptation of lust is easy because if you see something that one might lust after, it doesn't take much to continue looking. It doesn't take a lot. Where if you're tempted to commit a murder, for example, let's go all the way to murder. If you're tempted to commit a murder, you actually have to do something that's pretty substantial, or stealing, or whatever. Those are pretty difficult. You have to actually go beyond just receiving the temptation. But if you're tempted to look where you shouldn't be looking, and you look and you continue to look, it doesn't take much to just keep your eyes open and look in the same way. You could avert your eyes. It actually takes more to avert your eyes than not. But so it's an easy sin to commit, and it's one that, well, men are attracted to women. That's just how God made us. But God also expects us not just to act on our basic instincts, not to act just if we feel attracted to something. You don't just act because that's what you feel like. And it's not just with this sin, but it's with all sin. We have a feeling, a desire for something. That's the sin, that's the temptation where Satan tempts us, and the sin would be acting on that desire. So Jesus says, looking on a woman with the intent of lusting after her. It becomes more than just seeing something that is inappropriate, but with an intent of lusting after her. And this goes beyond even just inappropriate, because somebody can be dressed completely appropriately, and you can look to lust. Obviously, this verse is one of the reasons why pornography is a sin, because those are websites specifically designed to cause lust. And that's the only reason for it, is you watch it and you lust. You're looking on a woman to lust after her. So obviously we need to avoid that, and it's a terrible thing. It's caught a lot of people, but we need to stay away from that, protect ourselves. And a great verse for that is in the book of Job. Job is talking about, Job 31 here. He's talking to his friends, and he's saying, I'm a righteous person. One of the things he did in order to maintain his righteousness is in verse 31. He says, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? Okay, I made a covenant with my eyes. Why should I think upon a maid? What did Job do? Well, he decided beforehand. That's what a covenant with your eyes is, right? I've determined what I will look at and what I will not look at. And I've determined that beforehand. Because if you're making plans in the midst of temptation and you're deciding whether you're going to reject that temptation while you're being tempted, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. If you practice in your mind what to do, or at least tell yourself what to do when something comes along. I'm going to look away. I'm not going to give in to that. I'm going to say no. Then you will be able to go against those desires, those urges that you have. But you have to plan beforehand. Otherwise, well, and I believe that's what Job means here. He says, I've made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? Let's see, there's another one. Oh, it's in 1 Peter, I think. Let me see if I can find it here real quickly. Eyes full of 2 Peter. I was close. 2 Peter 2:14, talking about people who are unrighteous. These false teachers is what he's talking about. They're going to receive, verse 13 says, they'll receive the reward of unrighteousness as they that count it pleasure to riot in the daytime. So here's his description of these wicked people. They're riotous in the daytime, so there's no self-control there. Spots they are, blemishes, sporting themselves with their own deceivings while they feast with you, having eyes full of adultery. Well, what is that phrase? And they cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls, a heart they have exercised with covetous practices, cursed children. All right, so these people are bad news. And they're interacting with Christians. It says they feast with you, but look at some of their characteristics. They can't cease from sin. They beguile unstable souls, so they're trying to convince other people to sin with them. They have exercised their heart with covetous practices. If you want to be healthy, you exercise. But if you practice the wrong thing, you're going to get good at doing the wrong thing. You don't want to exercise your heart with covetous practices, because then then you'll have eyes full of adultery. Well, this is exactly what Jesus was talking about when he says, whosoever looks upon a woman to lust after her. That would be the definition of eyes full of adultery. You're going and you're looking for this sin. All right, so let's go back to Matthew chapter 5. This is the prohibition on adultery, and the prohibition not just on committing the act of adultery, but also looking with that lust. Now, I will say this. The Bible says, whosoever puts away, in Matthew 19, whosoever puts away his wife except for fornication commits adultery. Whosoever marries another which is put away commits adultery. So except for fornication there, someone might say, well, look, if you're looking upon a woman to lust after her, you're committing adultery in your heart. I don't believe that's a legitimate reason to divorce someone just because they have looked upon a woman to lust after her. The adultery that I believe Jesus is talking about is the actual act of adultery, which is a different thing. There's thoughts and then there's actions. And here Jesus is talking about sinful thoughts, but when you bring divorce into the issue, it's a sinful action that he's talking about there. But anyway, we're not going to spend too much time on that. I just wanted to comment there. Don't try to use this verse to justify a divorce for something that is not actual adultery, catching somebody in the act of fornication. All right, that was I guess it's a delicate topic, and we'll look at plucking your eyes out next time, which is sort of a strange thing. If your right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. So we'll look at verses 29 and 30, Lord willing, next week. But until then, I hope you have a wonderful time, a blessed time, and thank you so much for participating in class.